Hello guys, welcome to the long-awaited Lechraft server tour, Lechraft/OTM. I'm going to be explaining just the whole history of the server. I'm going to be touring everything. This is probably going to be maybe 2 or 3 parts of videos. I don't know how long it'll be, but there's a lot to talk about and a lot to explain. And I finally have some free time to do all of that. So yeah, I'll start. This is where the server started. This is the original starting village where me and Limson started just playing Minecraft without any technical stuff or anything. Me and Lemon, we've been friends for like 10 years now. It's a long story, it doesn't really matter. But we started the server, just the two of us, just to play Minecraft in, I think, 2019, something like that. Yeah, right before the pandemic started. And it's because of that you can see in this starting village, there's not that much technical stuff. You got my original starting house over here. I'll give you a tour of this. This is just a small little thing I built, and this is before we were kind of a I don't know, communist faction, I guess, if you want to call it that. Before we shared everything, right? Before, while we were still playing just as regular individuals. So yeah, you can see there's the chest room down here, just a bunch of random individual resources. And I mean, all of this stuff, red concrete, we have this in the millions at this point. So yeah, the whole individual aspect, I suppose, is gone. I think the only thing that I store here is, if I can find it somewhere, is the cobwebs that I use to make those pixel art paintings, but I'll show those when we get there in the end. For now, I'll tour the rest of the starter village. So you can see the house up here. And actually, the server tour almost didn't continue because we almost lost the save of the server. The file that we had saved on Google Drive got corrupted, and the only reason I'm able to make this video right now is because Lemson actually had the entire server file saved on his portable SSD that he found. So we got really lucky. But yeah, you can see some of the things are still corrupted. For example, I used to have a guardian in here and a ghast back there. They've both despawned, and that's because, yeah, I had the idea to make a zoo. I remember that, to just get one of every mob or one of every interesting mob in there. And again, before we did anything technical or anything like that. You can see down here in the main plaza, we had just a bunch of like sheep. I think we have pigs. Yeah, we got pigs back there. We got one of those automatic chicken farms that everyone has these days. We got llamas. I didn't even remember we had llamas in this version of the game. So yeah, you could see my house up there, and then you had Lemon's house down here. Well, it was more of a cave, I suppose. But yeah, this used to just be the server, just this little plaza and almost nothing else. We used to just play here, just as any friend group has their like 2 week Minecraft phase that people talk about all the time. It was pretty much like that. We just played Minecraft, and there wasn't anything technical about it. We were both, we had an affinity for redstone, but it wasn't really anything like what the server eventually turned into. And you can still see some artifacts of that. For example, back here, yeah, this house was my little brother. Well, little brother. He's my younger brother. He's only 2 years younger than me. But yeah, he built this house, well, before it got bombed, obviously. I think there's some more. Yeah, he built a few of these Japanese houses. Not this big one. This I'll get to that one later. And yeah, that used to be the server. I had a flower farm down here. So yeah, you had my house, Lemon's house. You had my brother, and then a few other things. This house down here was just the Apple Store. There's some AirPods in here. This was by a friend of mine. I'm not gonna say his name. His username is like Night Owl. Yeah, I used to. I've known him since, I don't even know. I think it might have been 10 years by now. Known him since high school. He used to play on the server as well. He had his base down here. Oh crap! Not enough ladders. And yeah, these flags, I've griefed him with that. But yeah, again, you can see just his own storage, nothing special. I think he had like, I don't know, I think this was supposed to be some farm. He had an enchantment room. I think this is supposed to play like the Undertale. That's pretty fun. But yeah, I think that's his base. Not much more to see here. Then to the right of his base, we had a fish farm. Oh, dude, yeah, oh my god. I remember when these things were invented. This was like game changing because you could get so much extreme loot in the early games and pretty much an infinite supply of fish, which was like the best food ever. And then in this house down here, we had one of our friends was playing here, but but then he was X-raying, so we kicked him off the server, and we turned this house into like a really basic smeltery. I don't even think this is a very good design. I don't really remember much of this, but yeah, it just kind of spreads all the things across the furnaces and cooks everything. And I think that was the extent of the server. Oh no, except for these farms. I forgot about them. Community farms. I think I'm the one who built this. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember. But we had this little cave system with, yeah, just one of every crop. We had potatoes here. To the left, I can see wheat. We have beetroots down here somewhere. Carrots. I think it ends here. The beetroots must be in the other direction. Yeah, you got sugarcane here, and then yeah, there you go. You get beetroots. So yeah, we used to just this used to be our food source. We used to just farm here, and yeah, just play like any other regular Minecraft server before Lechraft turned into Lechraft. It didn't really have a name. It was just a couple, just us as friends playing the game. And then I remember it was maybe during like December or something after we played for like a month or so that Lemon started learning about like the concept of technical Minecraft. And he explained it to me, and I was really interested because we both always kind of liked redstone. So it was an interesting concept, right? And we agreed to play more technical, you know, to build bigger projects and whatnot. And then Lemon had the idea to open up the server to allow like people that we didn't know, you know, friends we didn't, or sorry, people that weren't our friends. And I was originally against that idea. I really didn't want random people that we didn't know to join our server. I feel like it would ruin everything and it would just be a weird thing. But eventually I agreed, and we posted a listing on Reddit. I have no clue what subreddit it was. Probably something to just find people for your servers. And yeah, we just listed it as a server that was kind of technical, but you could also join if you weren't technical, because obviously we wanted new people in the beginning. And I actually remember sitting up here on this exact mountain while we were discussing this with Lemon. I was just flying around here while we were talking because we had to come up for a name while we listed it, and we thought about it for a little bit, and then Lemon came up with the idea of a Lechcraft because his username is Lemon, and it was a technical server, so instead of like Techcraft, it would be Lechcraft, and I thought it was the stupidest idea ever. But we just went with it because we couldn't really come up with anything better. And then yeah, it eventually just stuck with me, and I really like it now. And then in the middle, around I don't know, maybe a year in or so, when the server was quite big at that point, we realized that Lechcraft kind of was just a bit of a weird name to have for the server because it was too linked to Lemon. You know, it wasn't really fair, if you will. Which is when we made a vote to change the name of the server. We just voted along all the members. We came up with a few ideas, and that's when it changed to Otium. Now I formally rejected that name change. It will always be a Lechcraft in my heart, but yeah, officially we did change the name to Otium. And yeah, before that, when we still had Lechcraft, that's the name we used to post on that Reddit thread to find new players. That brings us to this house, which is the first player that joined, which was Caruso. He was part. Yeah, you can still see his mailbox. He was part of the server for a very long time, but he was more of a builder. He didn't really care too much for technical stuff, for redstone or anything like that. But we accepted him anyway because we needed a builder. We needed someone who could make things nice. And yeah, he was a part of the server for a very long time before he eventually left to go on to more creative server. He built this house. He built this Japanese house. He designed it on the creative version, and he never actually finished it. I'll show you footage right now um, of the house in the creative server. But yeah, he designed all of this, and he never got to finishing it because he quit the server before he got to the end of it, which is a little sad. Yeah, he's kind of an important person because he's the first player that joined. He is what made it from a normal server to a public server. And yeah, we still talk to him while the server was running, and he's actually the one who designed our spawn, which we'll see later. He was the first person, and it's only after that that slowly we started getting some traction, and the more and more people started joining until we became what Lechraft actually was. We became I'd say mid-sized to small-sized technical server, but you know we were known in the community. I guess we weren't famous or anything, but we were definitely on the map, if you will. And yeah, it was all thanks to Lemon's idea to expand the server into something something bigger than what it was before. You can definitely see the influence of when we started becoming much more technical and making much more interesting builds. This spruce farm, sorry, this cobblestone generator here, I don't think this was anything too special. But this spruce farm behind there, this was like, I think when we made this was an unreleased design. Like we didn't design any of this, some other guy made it, but it used to just be that whenever we needed a farm or anything, which I think most players could relate to, is you just hop on YouTube, type in the farm and the version, and you just find something that yeah, that looks good, but this was like you had to be on some subreddit, or this was more niche, I guess. And this was the first time that I actually felt like a technical player when we got a farm in our server that wasn't from a YouTube design. And I don't know who made this. I'll try to look for the creator so I can put the credit on the screen. But yeah, we used this spruce farm. I mean, I think we used it all the way till the end of the server. This was really efficient. It grows 4x4 spruces, and it gives you a ton of wood for the amount of bone meal that you use. It was pretty efficient as well. I don't remember the exact rates, but if I find them again, I'll put them on the screen so you can see them. This was one of the first technical builds we did on the server. Was this tree farm? Here we are. This was, you know, pre-technical, if that's what you want to call it. Oh damn, I have dogs. This was pre-technical. This is just a normal skeleton farm. I think it just uses a spawner. I don't remember exactly when I built this, but this was definitely before we had anything. Oh yeah, you can see got the spawner right here. It just carries the skeletons up with water, drops them down. I think every single person knows this design. And yeah, we just had this little room that looked kind of nice, and this was pretty basic. This is nothing remarkable, but I want to be thorough with the server tour, so I figured I'd show this as well. And it seems that this has been griefed a little bit, but yeah, this was, I think, the last thing that I had to show that was before it turned into a technical server. That kind of concludes everything in the starter village. There's not much, not many bigger projects that went on here except for the few things that I showed. So let's go tour the rest of the server now. Let's head to spawn. So yeah, here we are in the spawn chunks. This whole thing was designed by Caruso long after he quit the server. We needed to build a spawn, and yeah, we didn't really have anyone on the server that could design buildings that looked nice. So we asked him, and yeah, he gladly did it. And I think it looks amazing. It kind of looks like the Colosseum. Yeah, it's still unfinished in many ways. We had the platforms up there that we used to get the shulkers for the mobswitch. We had the terraforming or the landscaping that wasn't done yet. I was the one doing this around all the corners. You can see the landscape kind of blends into the walls of the structure, and I got yeah I still remember it. This is where I was working. This is where I logged off on the server the last time, is on top of that mountain, because I was terraforming this. You can see all of this is made by hand by me. Yeah, all of this was made by me trying to blend the terrain into the structure so it would look much nicer. And I was supposed to do all of this mountain. I was supposed to figure out a way to do the water, because it's, yeah, the water's at Y63 and the edges stopped at Y60. But, you know, I was gonna figure something out, and yeah, it never happened. I never got to that point, so it's very sad to see all of that unfinished. But everything else is done though. The whole structure is built, which looks very nice. One of the main and most important things inside of the spawn chunks is, of course, our Shulker mobswitch, which was supposed to be a 560 player, 560 Shulker mobswitch, which would have been good for 8 players. But as you can see in the top, we got to 350 before we quit playing. There's like 50 more or something like that in the end, still waiting to be put into the actual mobswitch. But yeah, that never happened. Now, one thing that I always wanted to do with my videos is make them as user-friendly as possible. Lemon, for example, also made videos about the server, and his main goal was always to just document whatever it was he was doing. Well, for me, it was very different. I wanted my videos to be as understandable as possible. I wanted someone who had never played any technical Minecraft ever to be able to watch one of my videos and at least somewhat understand what was going on. And I'm going to try to do that with the server tour as well. There's going to be a lot of complicated builds that I'm going to show, and I will do my best to explain them as clearly as possible. And I will start with the mob switch. I will explain right now how mob spawning mechanics in 1.12 work and how chunk loading works, and then I will explain how we use those two mechanics to make the mob switch. This is a brief explanation of how the mobcap and the spawning mechanics work in 1.12. This is a Minecraft world. Whenever a player joins, the mobcap of the server goes up to 70. There are 3 invisible spheres around the player that follow them wherever they go. One with a radius of 24 blocks, one with a radius of 32 blocks, and one with a radius of 128 blocks. In-game, these are three-dimensional spheres, like you can see here. We have the green one, the blue one, and we have the big red one. But in this explanation, I will use 2D circles to make everything easier. Outside of the green circle, mobs can start spawning. This also means that within the circle, they can't. Outside of the blue circle, mobs have a random chance to despawn. And outside of the red circle, mobs despawn instantly. Since it's daylight out, no mobs are spawning on the surface, but they can spawn in caves as long as they are between the green and red circle. Whenever a mob spawns, you can see that the mob count goes up by 1. The spawning happens randomly and is in part decided by how many spawning spaces are available near the player. If it becomes night, there are now many more possible places for mobs to spawn, and they will start spawning. Mobs can spawn until the mob cap of 70 is reached. After the mob cap has been filled, no more mobs can spawn. The mob cap can be surpassed in certain instances. A spawner, for example, doesn't care about the mob cap, and it can keep spawning mobs as long as they get moved out of the range where the spawner doesn't spawn new mobs. Sometimes you can have 69 or 68 mobs in the mob count, and then pack spawning occurs where multiple mobs spawn together, in which case the mob cap will be surpassed. But again, as long as the mob cap is reached, no new mobs will spawn randomly. If a mob is outside of this blue circle, like this creeper on the left for example, it has a chance to randomly despawn. And when it does, the mob count will be reduced by 1. If a mob moves outside of the red circle, it will instantly despawn and the mob count will be reduced by 1. If the player moves, the circles move with him, and if that causes a mob to now be outside of the red circle, it despawns instantly and the mob count will be reduced by 1. If a player kills a mob, the mob count will be reduced by 1. If a player uses a name tag on a mob, that mob cannot randomly despawn now, but it also doesn't count towards the mob cap anymore, even though the mob is still there, so the mob count will be reduced by 1. And this also counts for mobs that have been given items like armor or tools, for example. Whenever the mob count drops under the mob cap, new mobs will spawn within the green and red circle until the mob cap is reached again. If a second player joins, the mob cap will be increased to 140. It's 70 per player. This means new mobs will start spawning until the new mob cap is filled again. The mobs don't have to be perfectly distributed between the two players. If there are less possible spawning spaces near one of the two players, more mobs will spawn near the other one until the mob cap is reached again. The only thing that matters is that the mob cap gets filled. If one of the two players flies up into the air and stays there on a block, there will be 0 possible spawning spaces around that player, but the mob cap will still be 140, meaning that the other player who's still on the ground will encounter twice as many mobs as usual. This mechanic can also be exploited, since you can have one player AFK somewhere in the air, while the other player is AFK at a mob farm, like a witch farm for example, and the mob farm will be more productive since more mobs will spawn there, given that there are enough spaces for them to spawn. Whenever the two players get near each other, their mob caps overlap and become something in between 70 and 140, depending on how far away they are from each other. You can see this in-game as well. As you can see, I'm the only player right now that isn't in spectator mode, and you can see that the hostile mob cap is 70 mobs. Right now we have a second player, and you can see that the mob cap doesn't switch to 140, but it goes to 85 because we're right next to each other and our despawn spheres are overlapping. You can also see that the further I fly away, the mob cap slowly becomes bigger and bigger as the overlap slowly goes away until we're completely out of range of each other, and then it goes to 140, and now it will stay 140 as long as we don't go near each other or near other players again. These are all the important mob spawning mechanics, and now that we have this knowledge, we can use it to create a mob switch. All we have to do is get 70 mobs per player that is online and keep them stored in a contained area where they are still loaded, but they can't harm any of the players. The mob cap will then be filled and no new mobs will be able to spawn around the players. As you can probably have guessed, there are a few practical problems with doing this. First of all, how do we get more mobs than the mob cap allows? Now, one way we could do that is by letting more people join the server, like getting 10 people on at the same time so the mob cap is high, then collecting a bunch of mobs and storing them in a certain space. But another way is to just to use a spawner. That's not the main problem though. The problem happens when we go away from those mobs. Let's say Lemon AFK'd underground over there to get all of those mobs to spawn from spawner. If he just decides to walk away now, the mobs will go outside of his red despawn circle, and they'll all despawn instantly, which will obviously be no use to us. And one way to get around that is by leaving with a nether portal. And that is the main way that the very basic mob switches are built. The only problem is now that once we leave that area through a nether portal or through any other means, those mobs aren't loaded. So even though they are technically there, the server doesn't know it, and therefore they do not count towards the mob count. So they're still of no use to us. Now to explain how to fix that, I will have to give a brief explanation on how chunk loading works. Let's say that every square inside of this grid is one chunk. If the player is standing in this chunk in the middle right now, a certain number of chunks in each direction will be loaded to make a square, and this depends on the render distance of the server. On our server, for example, this is 16, so 16 chunks in every direction will be loaded, and everything in between here to make one big square. I'll just go 4 chunks in each direction to make this explanation a little bit simpler. Not every chunk inside of this grid is an entity processing chunk. The requirements for a chunk to be entity processing is that a 5 by 5 grid of chunks around it has to be loaded as well, and then that chunk becomes entity processing. If you look at this chunk, for example, if we go 1, 2, 1, 2 in each direction, you can see that not everything in this square around it is loaded. So this chunk will not be entity processing. It will be what we call lazy loaded, which is where the server kind of loads it, but not really. This has a few benefits that I will explain later. Now, if you take this chunk, for example, this chunk will be an entity processing chunk because 2 chunks in each direction are fully loaded in a complete square around that center chunk. Now, this makes it so you can see a pattern start to emerge. If you look at every chunk and evaluate them, if you have one big square of chunks, you can see that the outer 2 rows of chunks are not entity processing because all of those chunks don't have a 5 by 5 grid of chunks that are loaded around them, but everything within that does. Whenever you have the player in the center like this, you have a grid of 14 chunks in each direction loaded around them, which are entity processing, and then a 2 chunk border around that square where the chunks are lazy loaded and not entity processing. The same goes for the spawn chunks. The spawn chunks on a 1.12 world are a 16 by 16 grid of chunks. Now this means that there will still be a 2 chunk border outside of all of them that are only lazy loaded, and everything in the middle is loaded. The spawn chunks are the only chunks that are permanently loaded all the time. If the server is running, the spawn chunks will be loaded. The other chunks that are loaded are the chunks around the players, but there are of course other ways to load the chunks without a player being there. The most common one used in 1.12 is to just take a hopper and point it into another chunk in the border. Now it is also very important that the hopper has a item in it so that it does actually load that other chunk because it's checking for something to put the item into. Let's say these are the spawn chunks, which will always be loaded. You can have a hopper inside of this chunk pointing on the chunk border into that chunk, which will make that chunk loaded as well. Then you can continue that and keep loading chunks in a line for as long as you want. And to turn this off, you can have an instant redstone line next to the hoppers, which will power them, turn them off, and therefore disable the chunk loading. Now, if you have something over here that you want loaded, what you're going to do is feather the hoppers out in this direction to get a 5 by 5 grid of chunks, which will then make that center chunk entity processing. And you can use this for a farm, for example. So if you have a farm that's bigger, you would just expand the chunks loaded so that the area of chunks that is entity processing becomes as big as you want it to. You just have to make sure that you have that 2 chunk wide border around there. Now for a mob switch, for example, we do not want that. We do not want an entity processing chunk uh, because the entity processing makes it so that those mobs are fully loaded and moving around, and this lags the server. The best thing you can do for a mob switch is have those mobs in a very far away area and just keep them lazy loaded. This way they count towards the mob count, but they do not lag the server. And that is how most basic and simple mob switches are built. You find a spawner about 3,000 blocks away from the main area where people work. You then AFK there and get 2, 3, 4, maybe 500 mobs all at the same time. You then leave that area with a nether portal so that the mobs don't despawn. And beforehand, you have made a hopper line towards that area so that you can load it from a distance. You then lazy load the chunk that the mobs are in whenever you want the mob switch to be turned on, and then 500 mobs will be counted towards the mob count, and no new mobs will spawn. Now this type of mob switch isn't ideal though, because if someone were to fly around that area and then fly out of it, those mobs would go outside of his red despawning sphere, and they would all despawn, in which case you would have to do all of that work all over again. Now also one extra remark to make is that every time the server auto saves, every chunk, all of the chunks that are loaded get unloaded for a second. So they will be reloaded again. Now for a mob switch, this doesn't matter that much, but if you have a complex machine, that can break when the chunks get unloaded without the machine being turned off, you need to make a permaloader. But I will explain this concept later when we get to that on the server tour. It's not important right now. One other remark is also that there are many other ways to load a chunk rather than just pointing a hopper into it. This is just the most common and easiest way to do it, so I will use that one for this explanation. So what we need to make a mob switch that is 100% stable is a mob that counts towards the mob cap, but doesn't get despawned when a player unloads it. There are a few mobs that fulfill these criteria. First are the illagers from the Woodland Mansion, but it would be impossible to capture enough of those. Second are witches that spawn during the world generation. So when the witch hut is first generated, there's always one witch in there, and that one also counts towards the mob cap, but doesn't despawn, but also this is obviously not practical to capture a lot of them. Then there's Elder Guardians, which again, there's not that many of them. There's only 3 per temple, and they don't respawn. And they also give you mining fatigue, which is very annoying. And then you have withers, which is a pretty good option because you can build them wherever you want. But the problem is that they are kind of hard to get in the early game when you don't have a good wither skeleton farm yet. They're also very destructive, so you need to build a wither cage to contain them. And they are also extremely loud, which is really annoying. And that brings us to the last mob, which has these properties and is also somewhat acceptable to collect, which is shulkers. Shulkers, they only spawn inside of the end fortresses whenever they generate, and they do not despawn, but they do still count towards the mob cap. And since there are multiple end fortresses spread around the end, and each one of them has a acceptable amount of shulkers, this is the mob that we personally chose for our mob switch. As you can see, we have the shulkers in minecarts right on the edge of the spawn chunks. These are the spawn chunks. The green chunks in the middle are the entity processing chunks, and this is the 2 white chunk that I talked about earlier that is only lazy loaded because they aren't surrounded by other loaded chunks. We have the shulkers right here on these minecarts, and right now they are inside of the lazy loaded spawn chunks. And as I said earlier, the spawn chunks are always loaded, so that means these chunks are always lazy loaded. So every single one of the shulkers inside of this huge construction right here all counts towards the mob cap. Now, when we need to use a farm, a mob farm, like the witch farm, for example, the guardian farm, or any other thing that counts towards the same mob cap as the hostile mob cap, as you can see in the top under the tab menu, we simply turn off the mob switch. We press a button that powers all of these rails on the left, pushes the shulkers outside of the spawn chunks, and then as long as no one is near the spawn chunks, these shulkers won't be loaded. Which means that if we are in a different area and we are AFKing at a mob farm, the mobs will be able to spawn. And that is the very basic principle of how a shulker mob switch works. You just collect a bunch of shulkers, and then you just keep them on the edge of the spawn chunks border, and you get them in and out whenever you need them in use or not. Now this brings us to another point, is how do you collect that many shulkers and bring them all the way to the overworld? Well, luckily I made an animation about this in the past, and I will show it to you right now and narrate what's happening. As you can see, we just go to the end fortress, power a bunch of rails, capture the shulkers, and then just leave them all on the ground, waiting for all of the rest to be captured. Then we take the shulkers, put them back on rails, and send them through the end gates one by one. The shulkers then go to the obsidian end platform, where we put them on another rail track and store them in these tubes. Once we have collected all of the shulkers in the fortress and send them towards the main island in those tubes, we unload them one by one and send them over to the end portal. There, they go over activator rails, they get jumped out of the minecarts, and they can only teleport to those 4 blocks next to the end portal. Everything else is covered with either buttons or water. Inside of the overworld, there's 2 locations where they go, and they're kind of randomized. Either they go within the 16 by 16 grid in the middle of the spawn chunks, which is where a player spawns as well when they die and don't have a bed, or they teleport to 0, 0. Now, when they reach 0, 0, they instantly teleport away in a random direction, and that is why we have the platforms this big. It's not because they can spawn all on those platforms, it's because they all get teleported exactly to 0, 0, and the platforms are just the size of their teleportation range. Once we figure out where the Shulker has gone in the overworld, we grab them again with rails and pick them back up, and then just send them towards the mob switch. You can then see that each of the Shulkers gets sorted automatically into a different tube. And then once we have filled that layer of the mob switch with shulkers, we just cover it up and start the second layer. And then we just repeat this process until we have a fully built mob switch. Next to the mob switch, we have the control panel within the spawn, which we use to control different machines on the server. The first one is a dragon egg duper. I'll show you that one right now. As you can see behind the control panel here, this just goes down and it's a super long redstone line that goes all the way around spawn and then all the way like 2000 blocks in one direction. It should be here in this corner. Yeah, so I'll go to the end right now, show you what that looks like. Alright, as you can see, this is just one of the end portals, and we have a falling entity duper over here, or falling block duper. I don't think it can clone every single falling entity, I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, it seems to have been totally messed up. The dragon eggs have been teleported all around. They're supposed to be standing, I think, on top of those slime blocks. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I've looked at one of these things. And yeah, it gets turned on, and then it just duplicates every dragon egg and sends it through to the end. It's just that the egg starts falling, and then it gets pushed into the portal, but at the same time it doesn't. So the egg stays on this side, but then a secondary egg gets pushed through, and it's obviously the only way to get the multiple dragon eggs, since it's not a renewable item, and we need those to clear bedrock. So this is the only way to really do that. But yeah, that's a dragon egg duper. Not that much to say about it. Next to that, on the control panel, we have the mob switch. I've already shown how that works. You press the button, and then the mobs just get pushed inside or outside of the spawn chunks, depending on whether before that the mob switch was turned on or off. But then we get to the most interesting part of the control panel, which is the Fortune RNG. I will explain what this does and how it works, but first I'm going to explain how we get most of our ores and mineable resources in general on most technical servers. Alright, I'm in a creative test world right now, and the thing that you can see right here is a world eater. This is the thing that we use to make all of our huge perimeters. It's obviously just a much smaller version. And once you get to the lower Y levels, where you start having things like lava, you first of all have the option to find a lot of ores like this, but you also can find obsidian, which the fluid sweepers down here, they can get rid of lava and water, but they obviously can't push away obsidian. So during these last levels, you need to kind of babysit the machine, pause after every layer, and then fly around and make sure you get rid of all of the obsidian and of course the ores, because you want to keep those. And I'll show you how we do that. Every technical server has a texture pack like this. You could just make one yourself or download another one that highlights all of the ores in a very obvious way. All of the ores that we care about, at least, like diamond, lapis, and emerald, if we could find any emeralds over here, and obsidian as well. And you use this for whenever you're using the world eater. So I'll demonstrate how exactly. So once you've done one layer, you would take your elytra and fly over, and then just remove and harvest all of the ores that you want. So you would go around, get all of the diamonds, get all of the lapis, get all of the redstone, get whatever it is that you need, and also make sure that you break any obsidian that you can find on a certain layer. Then once you have taken away all of the obsidian and gotten rid of all of the ores that you want to keep, that's when you activate the flying machines for just one layer. So we're going to come over to this side and place a redstone block here, so that whenever the machines dock, they don't instantly fly off again in the other direction. So place a redstone block right there. Then turn the volume off because these flying machines are extremely loud. And then just break this redstone right here. And then the flying machines will start flying. They blow up one layer, and they also lower the whole machine by 2 blocks on this side, and then once it reaches there, it goes down by 1 block. So you can see it breaks one layer and covers a new layer of blocks that you haven't seen before, and then while this is happening, you just fly over, and we have a perfect example over here. You find new diamonds, you mine all of these, and then you just keep flying, obviously with your elytra and not in creative. We see some obsidian down there that we'll have to take care of later. We see some lapis down here. Some of it will get blown up, but that's not the end of the world. You harvest all the lapis. And now the machine has reached. You fly over, you make sure everything is cleared. You come over to the other side and make sure you disable the flying machine again. Then you get rid of this redstone block on this side, which will lower the machine by 1, send the dupers and the flying machines back, and you just repeat that process. It did seem like I broke this version because the dupers are just going off on their own, and also the fluid sweepers aren't working, but you get the basic idea. You just have to imagine a world eater like this over a 32 by 32 chunk area, which is insanely huge, and you get a ton of ore by just doing something that you already had to do anyway. Right, after that, we're super rich and we have a ton of ores, but what do we do with them? Well, it depends. Sometimes we just keep them, like emerald ore, for example, is more valuable than the emeralds that we would get from them, because we can get emeralds from trading with villagers, and the only way to get emerald ore is to just go out and mine emerald ore, so it is more valuable since it's not renewable, so we like to keep that around in case we need it for decoration purposes, and the same kind of goes with the diamond ore. We have more than enough diamonds that it doesn't really matter anymore. But if we would want to mine them, we would obviously use a Fortune 3 pickaxe. Now the problem with Fortune 3 is you don't always get the maximum amount of items that you could possibly get. Let's see, yeah, we only get 2 emeralds from this one. We got 4 from the other one. It's not always the maximum amount. And that is what the Fortune RNG does, is it manipulates the RNG of the game to always give us the maximum amount of drops from any ore that we break. And this goes for all of the ores that I have in my inventory right now. I'll give a demonstration now of how it works. You can see I have my Fortune 3 pickaxe here, and we will turn on the Fortune RNG. This obviously, just like anything else, just goes to an instant language and goes to something. I will explain how it works a little bit after. But as you can see right now, if I break any of these ores with a Fortune 3 pickaxe, I will get the maximum amount of drops. I will get 32 per lapis ore every single time without fail. I will get, I think, 4 from coal, not sure. Yeah, 4 per coal ore, and it keeps consistently being 4. I will get 4 emeralds per emerald ore. You can see. I will get, is it 4 with quartz? I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, 4 quartz per quartz block, which is also very useful, by the way, because there's no renewable way to get quartz. The only way is to mine it during like working on perimeters or just going out and getting it. So it's very useful to be able to maximize that. We get 4 diamonds, and then I think it's 6 or 8 redstone per ore. So yeah. Extremely valuable, of course. I don't think I need to explain the value of something like this to have it on the server, and I will quickly explain how this works. Alright, I will now give a brief and simplified explanation of how the Fortune RNG actually works. As you can see, this grid of squares right here are all of the chunks that are loaded. This one on the right is me right now. You can see 16 chunks in each direction. This should be a 32 by 32 grid of chunks that is loaded right now. I think somewhere here on the right the perma loader is, and oh yeah, it's right here. I will explain how this works later. But you'll see what happens when I press the button to start the Fortune RNG. You can see an instant line that gets unpowered, which makes all of the hoppers here activate. And then you can see all of these chunks here being loaded in this weird pattern. Everything in Minecraft that's supposed to be randomized isn't actually random, it's just pseudo-random. It follows a certain code or a certain process. And the chunks that you see being loaded right now are on top of a woodland mansion. Whenever you load a chunk inside of the region that contains a woodland mansion, it resets the RNG seed of the world to a certain value. And whenever the RNG seed of the world is at that certain value, the ores that are being mined with a Fortune 3 pickaxe will drop the maximum amount of drops. And that is why you see this going in a huge loop. Every single tick, one chunk is being loaded. You can see there's 20 ticks per second, and you can see how fast the chunks are being loaded. It's 20 chunks per second, so 1 for every tick, which just means that a new chunk inside of that woodland mansion biome is being loaded every time. So every single tick, it resets the RNG seed of the world to the value that we want, which is the value that makes it so that the fortune drops give all of their maximum loot. Now, this obviously wasn't easy to figure out. I think it was Earth Computer that was the first one that figured this out. And yeah, it's obviously very impressive. It's also quite lucky that the RNG seed or the process that controls this is hard coded into the game, so it's always the same, which is obviously very helpful for recreating the same results every time. And this also, you can also do this for nether warts. So whenever you break nether warts, you can get I think it's 4 nether warts per full crop. I think that's the maximum. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, you can use the RNG manipulation for that as well in a very similar way. And this right here is what it looks like in game. You can just see all of these chests which are on chunk borders. This is another way to load chunks, by the way. You have all of these chests on chunk borders that are just loading the chunks in this direction, and then it just follows the glass. It goes there, and then it goes in that loop the way you saw it on the chunk debug map. But yeah, this is just how the RNG manipulation looks like. It's just a bunch of chests in a certain area of the world. It doesn't matter very specifically where you built this. You can't just build this anywhere. But yeah, it's above the woodland mansion. It just loads it in a certain way, and it manipulates the RNG of the world. Again, simplified explanation. I'm not an expert on this. The Fortune RNG was the last important thing we needed to see at spawn, so we can start exploring the rest of the server now. And I think it's a good idea to start off by coming to the Nether Hub, which is essentially the center of the server. We have this huge cylindrical perimeter around it that's dug from bedrock to bedrock, and we did this all by hand. We did not use any world eaters or anything like that for this perimeter. We did all of it by hand, so we have a ton of netherrack stored on the server right now. And then we have this nether hub design in the middle. I feel like it's kind of like a wasp's nest or a bee's nest just hanging from the ceiling, but it's very nice because you have access to every single one of the piston bolts here. You can also just go to one of these unused gates, jump out, and then just explore the nether itself. And because of this huge hole in the bedrock in the top, you can easily just fly out of here and tend to whatever it is you need to do on the nether roof. There's a lot to see on the roof of the Nether, but I think we should start on the portal here in the center, which will take us to the central storage, and then we can look at the rest of the things here. Alright, here it is. This is our central storage. Oh, damn, these portals are kind of loud. You can see we have we have the painting up there. And then yeah, we just have one hallway of storage because this is actually a temporary central storage. We didn't want to commit that early into the lifetime of the server to a full design of a central storage because we wanted the central storage to be as lag free as possible, to have the ability to recall items, so you can just like press a few buttons and it calls a shulker box full of a certain item to you. It would have to be binary coded. We had a lot of ideas, and the storage technology just didn't exist yet, so we didn't want to commit ourselves to a one single design. Now we did eventually build a full central storage. We reduced some of the features because some of them were a bit excessive. We didn't really need everything that we wanted, and we built the whole thing on the creative server. The problem is that the creative server is gone as far as we know. The file has been corrupted. We were lucky enough to be able to have a random backup on Lemon's hard drive for the survival server. It wasn't even an SSD, it was an external hard drive that he just had laying around with the server still on there, and that's the only reason I'm able to do this tour at all. But yeah, we lost the creative server. I will look for it a little bit more, and if I can find it, I will just insert it at the end of the tour, or I will just see how I edit it. It doesn't matter. But as far as we know right now, we do not have access to the creative server, so I cannot show you what the central storage was supposed to look like, which is quite a shame. I also won't be able to show Caruso's little Japanese house that he made, but yeah, it is the way it is. At least we still have the survival server, which is obviously the most important thing. Now here at the temporary central storage, we have a tiny little sugarcane farm, cactus farm. I think there was pumpkin and melon. No, I think I just got confused by the pumpkins on top of the sugarcane farm. But yeah, we have a little enchantment thing down here. Honestly, it's not really that much important stuff down here. As I said, it is temporary. We have shulker boxes of food, beacons. This is so lazy, just putting wither skeleton skulls in the in the beacon shulker. But yeah, just like armor, yeah, just random things. It's still good for a central storage, but I mean, we don't even have like gold blocks, and yeah, I mean, we really do not have all the items that we need. The full central storage is much bigger, and I really hope we can recover the creative server somehow so I can show you guys. But yeah, for now this is all we got. This is just a temporary central storage, which is still interesting to look at, I guess, but not as much as the full one. You can see the way it works is we have shulker box storage down here for all of the items, and then we just have the loose items up here in these three chests. Same with the repeaters, yeah, shulker box of repeaters in case you need to just grab one on the go, and then just loose repeaters in case you need a few, and that goes for all of the items. Alright, that was pretty much everything in the central storage. Next video we'll go through the portal and we'll start exploring further out from the Nether hub.